Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the PivotBoss pre-market video for Friday, June 17th, 2022. I am Frank Ochoa, aka PivotBoss. Happy Friday, everyone. Here's a look at the ES in the daily time frame. In the previous session, we had another heavy Thursday after FOMC Wednesday. That happened here recently here again, where on a Wednesday, FOMC Wednesday, price rallied a bit. The next day was a big down day that triggered additional weakness ahead. Not a big up day on Wednesday, but it was one up day and a big, huge down day that followed on Thursday afterward. These down days were pretty significant. High range days, big time continuation to the downside, and as you'll notice right here, the ES for the first time has reached the previous year's low. So for momentarily there, this was an outside year down here, as the second trading day of the year was just above the previous year's high. A quick taking of the previous year's close offered brought us right back to the previous year's midpoint. Eventually, once the midpoint had given up, we made our way down to the previous year's low. So we've made it all the way across to the previous year's low, but this doesn't magically appear to be a low here, right? This doesn't look like it's just going to bounce off the low and magically return back to the highs up here. So we probably have a lot more to go here in terms of finding a strong low. But a couple of things happened yesterday. Number one, we got that previous year's low. And number two, we got the key range target. That major 8-day sell-off here, bounce back, gave us a new key range. The 50% extension was here and the 100% extension right there. So we reached the 100% extension of the key range to the downside. So we finally got two significant targets in the same day here for the ES. Those are targets that we talked about from the first month of the year. And here we are mid-June finally getting those levels. Again, we may need to see a bit more downside before we finally find a strong low. I've mentioned before, perhaps as low as 3,200 could be ahead, maybe even down to 3,000 as price retraces through some of this thin portion of the profile. But from a short-term, near-term perspective, perhaps we may be at a bounce point here fairly soon. This market hasn't been one that has gone down in a straight line. Instead, it's had more of a channeling behavior. We're down toward the bottom of the channel. We could see a modest bounce back up, say toward 3,900, and that could offer another opportunity for bears to defend and rotate lower to new lows. So again, this market's not dropping and taking the elevator straight down. Instead, it's going down in steps here. On the down rotations, it is very aggressive, as we saw here over the last week, but at the same time, there have been bounces throughout the year that have been selling opportunities. So even if we do bounce here, again, say to about 3,900, maybe as high as 4,000, that could provide another opportunity to sell for new lows up ahead. So right now, watching to see how it behaves here today. Quad witching today. We do have Fed Chair Powell speaking here prior to the RTH open as well, so that could provide some headline risk. After a high range day, there tends to be low range volatility chop as the market basically digests that recent price action. And again, on quad witching, there could be some back and forth price action here today. Taking a look here at the ENQQ, you'll notice the ENQQ again looking very similar to the ES right now. Narrow range right now. ES trading 40% of average range. The ENQQ is at 38% of average range. We have a high range Thursday to the downside. That was a big high range day. This is the previous year's low over here, 12207s. We've done taking that out already, and we could be looking at a bit more downside. Actually, we got the target here. For the most part, that target 11067 was reached here. That's the 25%. Yesterday's low, 11068 half. That is the 25% extension from the previous year's range. We may be looking at further downside toward the 50% now. The 50% a little bit lower into the 9927. So that would put us into the quadruple digits here. after staying above 10,000 for quite a long time here, we could still be looking at a move back toward 10K and that S50 up ahead. Very similar to the ES though. This market is at a channel low here. That cycle low could lead to a bit of a bounce back up within the range. So we've been kind of channeling like this. We may be 1, 2, or 3 days here from finding a decent low, and we could bounce back. Say we bounce back toward 12.2, that could provide another opportunity to sell it for another round of new lows up ahead. Alright, let's take a look at crude oil now. Crude oil found a very strong low in the previous session, ended up rallying about 5 handles off the low of the day. One thing we mentioned a few days prior is that this range right here was significant, had about 13 points of energy built up in that narrow range from the highs of about 123. We mentioned that we could be looking at about the 110s in terms of a downside target. We got the 110s yesterday, and then price rallied 5 points off of those levels. A little bit of pullback late in the day, but again, 113 is the midpoint of that significant rejection. We've seen plenty of rejections here recently, and each of them has led to a return back toward previous highs. Matter of fact, if we look at a 7-day range, we could be looking at a 10 to 13 point rally right back to the 123s up ahead, but 113 needs to hold in order for that to happen. From a very short-term perspective, from this high to this low, there is a very clear impulsive sell-off. That gives us about 117.07 as the upside target. From a near-term perspective, that could give us a brand new key range. That key range could be very useful for fading and for extensions outside of that range down the road. And as a matter of fact, to the downside here, if we were to see this midpoint reached at 117.06 here, from that edge, if we fail, if this is a failure right now, if we're seeing a failed new high and we close below that midpoint, then perhaps we're looking at a 50% extension to the downside. That takes us into about 104, and then the 100% extension takes us right to about 97. So we could be looking at a return back toward the May and April lows if price can't stay above the 113s here soon. Alright, let's take a look now at Bitcoin. Bitcoin having a modest day higher right now, up about 0.4%. New lows, it appears here, are very close, 20,145. Previous lows was 20,025, so very close to the lows here. Again, one thing we mentioned before was there was enough energy in this narrow range right here. This range right there, enough energy to cause expansion of about 10 to 13,000 points. So to fail at 28K, we mentioned there could be an easy push down to 18K. 18K would also represent a 25% extension from the previous year's low. So that's the S25 level on the PivotBoss pivots, 18.2. Additionally, if we drop that extra 3,000, from 10 to 13, we could be looking at a move into about 15K. So we still have more downside to go. You can see how clearly this downward trending or downward sloping Pima trigger zone continues to provide resistance. So any bounce could still be seen as a selling opportunity as this thing continues to melt down toward the teens of price here, 18, 15, perhaps even 12.5. If we take a look here at ETH, Ether futures down about 0.5% right now. Mentioned before that when this thing was sitting on 1800 that we could see a further 50% haircut in price as we move downward toward the 100% extension of the January key range. That is 902.50. So from 1800 to 900, that's a 50% haircut. We're almost there now. The low a couple of days ago was 10,010, or basically 1010. And again, there's no real end in sight to this meltdown. We could continue to see not only a push to 902.50, but the previous year's low of 717s. And as we mentioned a little bit earlier with the ES, you're not just going to hit the previous year's low and bounce. You tend to push through that low by some degree, maybe find rejection, and then once you're able to reclaim it, you tend to see a bounce. So we could be looking at further weakness up ahead, not only to 902, but perhaps even the 700s down below. All right, that is it for now. We'll see how this develops here heading into the holiday extended weekend. Monday is a holiday, the Juneteenth holiday here in the United States. So we will have our next pre-market video on Tuesday. Everyone have a fantastic weekend, and I'll see you in the trading room. Take care.